close activity on this room. We have the panel on test automation with the participation of Charlie, as we know him, or Carlos Gauto. He has many years of experience. He's champion of K6. Also, he has a streaming channel on automation. And many years of experience, and currently you're working in Mercado Libre. Over here we have Laura Gayo. She works on test automation, performance testing, whatever needs to be done. She's very passionate about her work. She's been working for the past 5 years in this industry, and it's a pleasure to have her here today. And Fornara, 10-year experience in software development, more than half as part of our team. And also, he's an all-terrain employer. He teaches, he participates in workshops. So having introduced the panel, I'm your host today. And let's start with the first question. So we're talking about automation. It's no longer the work in the future, something good to help us make more money, to avoid repeating tests. It's become a requirement for the team to answer the multiple challenges and the agile dynamics that are required today. That has been an incredible change in the past few years. People have understood that to evolve together with test automation is a basic requirement nowadays. So Charlie, let us know, tell us a bit about what skills are needed to use test automation in a profitable way. So I think that people need to know software quality very well as core of their knowledge. That's a key aspect. An engineer who works on test automation will watch over the tests, and they need to understand the main concepts around it. I absolutely agree. The career path of quality engineer, it demands people that are able to do several different activities. They need to have a good base of because you're going to be collaborating within a team where the aim is to produce quality software, and automation may be the key, but also you need to know how to test, you need to know how to develop, you need to know if the product generated is correct or not. I think also it's very important to have excellent collaboration skills. If you're an automator, you need data. You need to know who you're supposed to speak to. You need to understand what you need to automate and give priority to the test cases in an appropriate way, and do all of this in a dynamic way. So collaboration is a key aspect to achieve this. Some people may think that automation allows you to interact less. And that's not the case, actually. So we need to know, we need to understand the language of coding oriented to objects, to coding. We need to, in order to be able to exert or hold control over the changes that we make. There's been a radical change in this sense. In terms of automation, it's more than having the basic knowledges. Just recently, Charlie was saying that even if you're an automator, you end up doing so many other things. Well, I'm on it. Let's check the pipeline. Let's create images for this or that. And it is true, if you're part of a team and you're all pushing together towards the same goal, that's the attitude that that you need to have. What was the evolution of the role of the team players? It's not enough to know a single specific coding language. You need to take it a step further. You need to be able to set up a pipeline, to know the structure. You need to know the application architecture. So the role has evolved, and we have had to adapt based on the needs of the teams. So let me ask you another question about challenges. In this evolution, what are the main challenges that automators have in order to achieve the current goals? Based on my experience, we try to develop strategies to have a return of the inversion, of the capital inversion in terms of test automation. So the challenge is to share this approach with all of the team, that they assume responsibility for the project, and not be confused about that desperation need to have everything automated. We also need to take a little pause to develop and plan. If we have a huge array of automated tests, but they don't do the job, then what's the point? Supplementing that, let's think about what generates value for our client. If we focus on the tests, on the core tests of the business of our client, because if we start automating, as Laura was saying, without having a plan, without understanding our interest, it will not lead to successful outcomes. Automating, being able to automate something doesn't mean that we need to automate it. We need to understand that automation is great if it added value, if it generates a positive impact. That's the most important aspect, to understand that we shouldn't be automating just for the sake of automating. In terms of challenge, I would say that there is a challenge that has always been a challenge. We need to be very, very clear when we communicate our aims and our function as automators. And this is a problem that's always existed for us. We want to release software as fast as we can. And even though there's a lot of information about this, we continue to think that automation is the only and best solution. Yes, evidently it helps, but how much? It's not always necessarily our best option. because I work in the services and hospitality, it may be that I think about the value, the added value to the client, especially, right? I have a high focus on this, but I think that we all should think about this. What is the value for the client if I automate a specific with a specific aim? So in terms of providing added value and at a faster pace, how do we translate the good quality practices to automation? What do you think are the best practices when it comes to test automation? So this is a popular phrase, but I'm a big fan of context driven. So of course there are models based on things that have worked before. That's perfectly fine. But testing is an intellectually challenging activity. It will take trials. We clearly need a space to experiment when it comes to testing, while not reinventing anything. We were discussing earlier that you can use a set of good practices, as in any development project, but you need to consider that it's impossible to apply everything that the books say on every single people in the teams, because we are people after all, and we don't all respond in the same way. Not all teams are the same. Not all teams have the same maturity when it comes to automator teams in terms of technical capabilities, using certain tools, design patterns for software. And it's important to educate on these aspects and to guide teams. Maybe the test engineers are behind these quality tests, but there needs to be a different guidance. And we're talking about design patterns not only in automation, but in other aspects as well. If the team collaborates in the construction, let's not forget that automation is basically software construction. We need to take this into consideration. We need to take all of these good practices when we produce software. There are very simple actions that we can take to have to implement good practices. In our case, a few years ago, we understood we had a lot of different projects, clients, businesses, but we know what we want to achieve, which kind of service we want to deliver. And that is before we start a project, and we're clear about this. We're going to use this and that tools or such and such methodologies. How are we going to prioritize the different elements? What do we analyze, search for, to know the boundaries? And all of this needs to be documented. So part of being a leader is to be very clear on what I expect from automators. Based on that, once the project is started, with the teams, we build agreements. We create agreements, sometimes with the development team, and we communicate effectively to really respect this set of good practices. So, Laura, I want to grasp this opportunity to ask you another question. How do you think that automation can help accessibility testing? When we talk about accessibility, we're talking about the possibility of any person to use a, a software in any context. There are many laws regulating this. We understand today that everyone has the access to the right to access information. There is an area that specifies this on accessibility. The same as in other areas of quality. But when it comes to testing, there's a big load of manual testing. They don't provide a wide coverage, but they can help as a support tool. So it's important to know that accessibility is being considered increasingly, thankfully. Adding on that, I think the key aspect is that we have a conscience of these accessibility issues, and of course it generates added value for clients that their application has accessibility options. And we have tools that allow us to automate these tasks when we add a portion of a code that could add maybe a bug or an artifact. How do we approach these tools so that we don't have to wait until production and then manual testing? There are controls that can be automated so we can check if our web is accessible or not beforehand. We need to work to have the feedback as soon as possible if we have an accessibility artifact. This is part of working towards having an actual accessible application. Can we do this in a more continuous way? Speaking of tools and automation tools, how do you see the development of new automation tools forward? What's your opinion? I think that this is something that has evolved, definitely. There are some tools that work that are all-terrain. provide solutions for different testings. They may be free of cost or paid. There's a big diversity, and that's a good thing. With diversity available, that stimulates developers to work on adding further features. We could speak a long time about just tools alone, but first we need to understand the problem that we have. No matter how many tools we may have, we will need to decide on one. And it will depend on each context. There are many good tools available, but it will depend on the client, on the business, on the project. We need to evaluate if it's an MP, if it needs to be super fast, if you need to have something out on the streets in 3 months, or if it's a long-term project. That's what needs to be considered in order to choose a proper tool. Whether I agree fully. I think it's part of understanding the context, the problem, and where we're standing at today. If you have a team that's very strong in JavaScript, then you know which kind of tool you will need. But maybe my team is more limited or functional, maybe in terms of costs. I will need a licensed or low code tool. It really resolves an issue, a problem. It allows to focus on the business and not so much on technical issues. And that's absolutely valid. Being a better JavaScript editor, for instance, and using my team's potential to help them to start automating. That could be the entrance to becoming automators, because they understood the basis. They understood how to prioritize when it comes to automation, and we provide them with a language to do so. I also agree. Before we start automating, it is necessary that we understand the context we're in and the team that we have. What training do we have? What is the learning needed for each tool? Do I have the proper training? For each project, all of these answers will be different. And all of them are important in order to decide the tool that we need to use. To close the panel, I will ask each of you to maybe give us final advice or message. What would you say to professionals who want to start in automation world? I think that something that is key is to look for the support of your community. If you're starting, or if you have some experience, or if you're an absolute expert with solid knowledge, you grow closer to a community, not only to learn, but also to help others. And this is very important. And I hope that all of us here and people watching us on stream just use your communities. There's a very wide community that speaks Spanish as well as every other language. and we need to take to use our community. I agree that there are a lot of resources, a lot of community. Technical issues are very important, but we need to remember that in these times of remote work, we have a bigger than ever necessity to communicate effectively in terms of language, in terms of how we write, of how we collaborate. We may have everything it needs to, we need to become great automators, and we forget that if we don't communicate effectively, we won't succeed. So in terms of growing closer to communities, we shouldn't be afraid to say, I'm not sure, let me look into that. It's important not to be afraid to answer questions. We don't need to know everything. We can work together to look for solutions and to create what's best. Thank you so much to our speakers for your time today. We have a few minutes for questions. Okay, so that question has so many things to discuss, but in testing, there is a concept that is very known, which is friends in testing. The gap between the different areas needs to be smaller, and that's what will help us achieve success. If I understand how to give priorities, what to automate, and what things need to be covered for, in terms of the interest of the stakeholders, of the users, to get feedback from the users, to know that I'm not testing things that are useless. I need to test things that will add value. Before I start automating, it's very important to have a solid base of functional testing. If I don't know how to test my system, I cannot even start thinking about automating. If I automate chaos, I will reach chaos quicker. If you pay attention to all of these talks, we're talking about observability, testing framework. We've reached a level where we have 5,000 test cases running simultaneously, and we don't really know how to process all of this information. We need to be a lot more conscious, have the conversations in order to understand what information should be prioritized, and define what's the best thing to do in that context, in that moment, which probably in next month, within 6 months, it will change. This is so dynamic, and that is why communication is absolutely key. I would like to add that we need to work with the development teams so that the apps are ready to be automated. I think that is very important. And that will lead to that will allow automation to succeed. If software is built in a way that cannot be automated, that will lead to problems. Is it okay to automate before going to production? the best tester is the final user. Is it good? Is it okay to automate before it reaches production? Do you have experience on this? I would say so, yes. But if we do that, we're on the plane of what is functionally referred to as automation. The user, is it what the user actually needed? The business unit may realize that what we automated is not what is being actually used by the end users. And this is a design issue. So this is another level. What was defined as a priority to be automated was not actually a priority because the user doesn't actually get to that function in the app. If it has no value, we need to move on and find another focus. Yes, and what I think is that the answer is yes. That has a lot to do with the return of the investment. What am I gonna do to have a fast feedback, to have my investment, a return of my investments? So is it unitary testing, service testing? How am I going to test my service? Will I have an holistic approach? What levels will I test? But once I do that, will I stop testing? No. I'm going to continue testing. And it's very important to collect the user feedback, to have tools to allow us to collect a feedback, what is known as a feedback loop. Final question. For the automator or the general team? For the automator, when you have a test case to automate, have you understood it? What are the validations that the flow will need? You need to understand what you're verifying with that test step. And you need to understand the verifications that need to be in place for the test to work. Who will try the new features? And the exploratory testing, which is very important. We won't stop needing manual testing for automated testing. The tester will need to have a lot of skill to create these test cases to make sure that everything works. Okay, so we have our final keynote to close this conference. Thank you so much for being in this room today with us.